Junho had been sitting in the same chair for 6 hours, and his back hurt, and nobody cared. The chair was made from something the Velhari called prestige stone. It was cold and hard, and shaped for a body that was not human. The first time Junho had sat in it, 11 years ago, he had shifted and adjusted for the entire session, and gone back to his quarters with a stiff neck. On his third visit, he had started bringing a small cushion from his room. He still brought it. In 11 years, not one delegate, not one aide, not one member of the Galactic Council had ever looked at that cushion and asked about it. Nobody looked at Junho long enough to notice small things. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. The council chamber was enormous. It curved inward at the top like the inside of a shell, and the light came from panels in the ceiling that shifted color depending on which species was speaking. A design choice made to honor diversity, though in practice the Velhari gold dominated most sessions. Around the great curved table sat representatives from 14 species. The Orathi clicked their jaw plates together when they were bored, which was often. The Tharqui sat like statues and only moved when they needed to vote. The Senokai delegate, a tall and quiet figure named Sene, was the only one who had ever looked at Junho during a session with something that resembled genuine attention. She did not do it often, but when she did, he noticed, because it was so rare. Today the session was about the Outer Reach Corridor, a stretch of unstable space that had been causing problems for 2 years. 3 human ships had been destroyed there last month, 29 crew members, people with names and families and photographs pinned above desks on ships that were now wreckage, drifting in the dark. The official council report on the incident had been submitted that morning. It was 41 pages long. The human losses appeared in footnote 7. Junho had submitted a proposal 6 weeks ago. A patrol rotation system, 4 species sharing coverage across the corridor, in organized shifts. The plan was careful and balanced and would actually solve the problem. Nari had spent 2 weeks building the logistics model behind it, working long past midnight most nights, cross-checking every variable, until the numbers were clean. It was one of the best pieces of operational planning the human team had ever produced. Council Chair Vel had not mentioned it once during the 6-hour session. What Vel had discussed, at length and with obvious pleasure, was a new monument to be constructed on Veth Station in honor of the Velhari contribution to galactic peace and scientific progress. He had shown design images. He had talked about materials. He had called it a symbol of everything the council stood for. The vote had passed unanimously. Everyone at the table had made their sounds of approval. The Orathi clicks, the Velhari hum, the low bow of the Tharqui. Junho had sat with his hands flat on the table and said nothing. When the session finally ended, he walked back through the long silver corridor toward the human delegation quarters alone. The corridor was beautiful, as everything on Veth Station was beautiful. Smooth walls, soft light, polished floors that reflected everything perfectly. It had been designed to impress. It succeeded. Junho had stopped being impressed around year 3. Nari was waiting outside his door. She was a small woman with short dark hair, and the particular kind of tired that came not from lack of sleep, but from knowing something you did not want to know. She held a datapad in both hands. She did not say hello, she just held the pad out to him. He took it and read. For 17 years, the human science team had submitted their research to the Council's shared knowledge archive. This was a condition of membership. Every species contributed. The work was supposed to be stored under the original author's name and made available to all members. That was what the charter said. What the archive actually showed was different. Nari had spent 3 months pulling access logs and submission records apart, layer by layer, cross-referencing original human documents against what appeared in the public archive. The human submissions were all there, every single one, but the names attached to them were not human. A medical paper submitted by Aram's research team in year 4 had been recategorized under a Velhari University's output. A navigation refinement that Doyun had spent 22 months developing, 22 months working in the lower levels of this very station, was listed in the archive as an Orathi technical innovation. A terraforming technique developed at a university on Earth, peer-reviewed and filed correctly on the human side, was now displayed in the Council's public gallery as evidence of Velhari scientific leadership. Not one case, not two, hundreds of them, 17 years of human scientific work, renamed and reassigned and celebrated under other flags. Junho read to the end of the report. He turned the pad over and set it face down on the desk. Then he opened his message history with the Council's administrative office and scrolled back slowly through 11 years of sent correspondence. 43 formal complaints, each one carefully written, each one providing specific evidence. Stolen research credit, ignored losses, dismissed proposals. Human crew treated as labor rather than people. Every message had been acknowledged. Every one had been logged and filed. Not one had produced a single concrete response. He closed the screen. Down in the engineering bays on the lower levels of Veth Station, a young man named Doyun was finishing the last hour of a 12-hour shift. He was 26 years old and had been stationed here for 3 years. He was excellent at his job, the kind of excellent that other people rely on completely, while never thinking about it. The way people rely on clean water or working lights. Tonight he had been rebalancing the atmospheric calibration across 6 sections of the station's residential wing. The original system had been designed by a Velhari engineering firm that had cut corners on the processing code. And the whole thing had been quietly rebuilt by a human engineer years before Doyun arrived. Doyun had then rebuilt it again himself in his first month, because he had found a pressure regulation flaw that, left alone, would have caused oxygen levels to drop slowly across the residential deck. Not fast enough to trigger alarms, slow enough that no one would have known until someone passed out. He had not been asked to find that flaw. He had not been asked to fix it. He had just seen it, understood what it meant, and fixed it over a weekend without saying anything to anyone, because that was the kind of person he was. As he packed up his tools that night, he looked around the bay slowly. The emergency seal protocol running on the wall panel, written by a human engineer who had left 2 years ago. The water reclamation unit in the corner, a direct copy of a human patent, filed under an Orathi company name. The cooling system overhead, designed by a human firm and installed by human contractors. The emergency lighting grid, same story. He picked up his bag. He said goodnight to the corridor sensor, because it beeped back, and nothing else in the hallway did. On the officer's deck, Commander Minho was reading the Council's response to his resource request. His fleet had patrolled the Outer Reach corridor for 60 days. 3 ships lost, 29 dead. He had filed for replacement vessels and formal hazard compensation for the families. The response was short. 3 sentences thanking the human fleet for its dedication, noting that resources were currently allocated, and saying the matter would be reviewed in the next budget cycle. Minho looked at the photograph above his desk. Crew photo from the Hanam, one of the 3 ships they had lost. 29 faces looking at the camera, some of them smiling. He thought about footnote 7. He thought about the monument vote. He set the response down and looked at the wall for a long time. Back in his quarters, Junho sat at his desk in the dark. He had not turned on the lights. He was not reading anything or looking at anything in particular. He was just sitting, very still, the way he sat when he was working something through to its final conclusion. He was a patient man. He had filed 43 complaints and attended hundreds of sessions and smiled at species who looked through him like he was part of the furniture. And he had kept going because he believed that patience was a form of respect. Respect for the process, respect for the idea that things could get better if you kept working at them. But he had reached the end of something tonight. He could feel it clearly, the way you feel the end of a road when the ground changes under your feet. There was nothing dramatic about it, no anger rising up, no decision made in heat. Just a very quiet understanding, somewhere deep and certain, that he was done. Done being patient with people who had mistaken his patience for weakness. Done filing complaints into a system that had been built to absorb them and do nothing. Done sitting in a cold stone chair with a cushion nobody noticed, in a room where 29 dead crew members were a footnote. He did not know exactly what came next. He would know by morning. But whatever it was, it would not look like anything he had done before. Because everything he had done before had been swallowed whole by a machine that did not care whether he was there or not. It was time to show them what not there actually looked like. Aram had been waking up at 4 a.m. for 3 months. Not because she could not sleep. She was a disciplined person and could sleep anywhere. On transport ships, on station cots, on the hard benches in waiting rooms outside council offices, where humans were sometimes left to sit for hours without explanation. She woke at 4 because 4 a.m. was the only time on Veth Station when the shared network was quiet enough that her personal terminal could run large document files without flagging in the system logs. She had been careful about that, extremely careful, because what she was building was not something she wanted anyone to find before it was finished. It was 11 pages long. She had written it the way she wrote everything, in plain, direct sentences, with no extra words and no room for misunderstanding. She had checked every legal reference. She had verified every procedural requirement under galactic membership law. She had read it so many times that she could have recited any paragraph from memory. But she still read it again the morning she brought it to Junho, just to be sure. She set it in front of him at breakfast, before his coffee was finished, without saying a word. She sat down across from him and watched him read. Junho read slowly. He never rushed through anything. He turned each page with the same steady attention he gave to everything. And Aram sat quietly and waited, because she knew better than to hurry him. He reached page 7. Something shifted in his face. Not much, barely anything, but Aram had worked with him long enough to read the small things. Something behind his eyes settled, like a question that had been sitting in a room for a long time had finally been answered. He read to the end, set the document down, looked at it for a moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a pen. Plain metal, made on Earth, the kind that cost nothing and lasted years. He uncapped it, found the signature line on the last page, and signed his name in the clean and unhurried way he did everything. Aram let out a slow breath. The document was called the Terran Withdrawal Declaration. It did not use dramatic language. It did not make accusations in loud terms, or list grievances in emotional paragraphs, or threaten consequences. It was written in the same tone as a report, factual, composed, and completely clear. It said that humanity had been a member of the Galactic Council for 22 years. It said that membership carried obligations for all parties. It said that those obligations had not been met. And it said that effective 30 days from the date of the signature at the bottom, humanity was ending its membership in the Galactic Council and would be recalling all personnel, vessels, research contributions, and operational support from Council-affiliated stations, programs, and territories. 30 days. No extensions, no conditions attached. Ariam had set up the distribution list herself, working backward from a list of every relevant address in the known network. At exactly 6 a.m, She pressed send. It went everywhere at once. Every council member species, every human colony from the inner systems to the outer edge, every human ship currently in service, every major news relay in the galaxy. No press conference was held. No spokesperson appeared on a screen. No speech was prepared or given. Just a file, and a name on it, and a timestamp, and silence. Junho finished his coffee and went to his morning briefing. The first reactions from the council came within the hour. Vel read the declaration during a recess, and made the short, sharp sound that Velhari made when something struck them as absurd. He passed it to Orath without a word. Orath read the first 2 pages and set it down like it had said something mildly foolish. A bluff, he said, with the easy confidence of someone who had never been wrong in a way that cost him anything. They have nowhere to go. They need us far more than we need them. He slid it across to Thark. Thark read the whole thing. He did not make any sounds. He folded his large hands on the table and stared at the signature for a while. He did not share whatever he was thinking. Seni read it 3 times in her private office. Then she opened a calculation file and began running numbers that had nothing to do with the current session. Species population figures, resource output data, infrastructure dependency maps, station operational logs going back 4 years. She worked through it quietly and did not speak to anyone for the rest of the morning. The first human to file departure papers was Dr. Yuna, a medical researcher in the Council's Central Health Division. She submitted her paperwork at 9 in the morning, packed 1 case, and left her keycard on her desk. She had requested a replacement researcher for her team 8 months ago. The request had never been processed. She attached the original request to her exit form, with the submission date clearly visible, and left the building. By noon, there were 40 names on the departure list. By the end of the day, more than 90. No one had organized this. There had been no group meeting, no signal sent through a private channel, no instruction to leave at a particular time. The people leaving had simply read the declaration and made their own decision, each one alone, and the decision had been the same across all of them, because they had all been waiting, not necessarily knowing they were waiting, but feeling it. The weight of being necessary without being recognized, of working hard inside a structure that absorbed the work and gave the credit elsewhere. The declaration had not created that feeling. It had just made it legal to act on it. Orath was briefed on the departures that evening. He told his staff they would return within the week. This is how they express frustration, he said, leaning back in his chair with the comfort of a man in complete control. It is not the first time a member species has made noise about leaving. They always need what we provide. His chief of staff placed a second report on the desk, a list of projects with human personnel attached. Orath picked it up. He read the first page. He turned to the second page. His expression did not change, but he did not lean back again. Minho received the declaration on his command ship while patrolling the edge of the outer reach. He called his senior officers to the briefing room and read it to them out loud without commentary. When he finished, nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then his second officer, a quiet man named Guion, said, "It's about time, sir." A few people nodded. That was the whole reaction. No cheering, no celebration, no dramatic moment. Just the particular quiet satisfaction of a room full of people who had been waiting a long time for someone to say what they were all thinking. Minho sent Junho a message that was 7 words. "Give the order when needed." Junho replied with 2. "Stand by." Doyun was one of the last humans remaining on Veth Station. In the final 10 days of the 30-day withdrawal period, he worked with great care. He went through every system he was responsible for and documented everything, not in technical language meant to impress, but in clear, simple steps that someone unfamiliar with the systems could follow. He organized the files into a clean archive and saved everything to a sealed drive. On his last morning, he walked through the engineering bays slowly, touching nothing, just looking. He checked a fitting near the atmospheric panel that had been slightly loose for 2 weeks and tightened it. He replaced an air filter that still had life in it, because in 2 weeks, nobody would know to check it. He did these things without being asked, because that was the kind of person he was. And because his mother had told him when he was young, that the way you leave a place says more about you than the way you arrive. He found the station's chief maintenance officer, a Velhari named Torv, near the operations desk, and handed him the sealed drive. "Everything is documented," Doyen said. "All the calibration cycles, the seal protocols, the water reclamation schedule, step by step." Torv looked at the drive, then at Doyen. "You are leaving today." "Yes." "When will others come to replace you?" Doyen picked up his bag and settled it on his shoulder. "There are no others," he said simply. He smiled in a way that was not unkind, and walked to the docking bay. The transport lifted from the station at midday. Doyen watched through the small window as Veth's station shrank against the dark, bright and silver and enormous, a thing built to look like the center of everything. He watched it for a while. Then he looked away. That evening, the lights in the station's eastern residential wing flickered. Maintenance was called. They opened the calibration panel. They found the sealed drive and the documentation inside it, organized and clear and thorough. They read the instructions carefully. Then they looked at each other. Because reading the instructions was one thing. Understanding what they were actually looking at was something else entirely. And the people who understood it, the people who had built it and learned it and kept it running quietly for years, were on a transport ship getting smaller in the distance. The lights flickered again. Nobody panicked yet, but several people in that room, separately, had the same thought at the same moment. The thought that this was only the beginning of a very large problem, and that the problem was going to get considerably worse before it got better. It started with the temperature, the way a lot of serious problems do, quietly, and in a way that was easy to ignore at first. The eastern residential wing of Vex Station dropped 2 degrees over a single night. Nobody woke up because of it. The Velhari delegates in that section simply noticed in the morning that the air felt heavier and the rooms were colder than usual. And they filed noise complaints about the ventilation system because it had started making a low, uneven hum. The complaints went to maintenance. Maintenance went to the atmospheric calibration panel. They opened the sealed drive Doyen had left. The documentation was there, organized, clear, written in simple steps. The problem was that following steps required understanding the system behind them, and this system had been rebuilt from scratch by human engineers over 4 years. They did not, and could not, replace the years of experience needed to understand why. Maintenance did their best. The temperature stopped dropping. It did not go back up. By the end of the first week, station-wide life support efficiency had fallen from 94% to 71%. The council brought in an external Velhari engineering firm to assess the situation. 4 specialists spent 3 days reviewing the systems and produced a detailed report. The report said the infrastructure was highly complex, that full operational knowledge transfer would require significant time and resources, and that interim performance reduction should be anticipated and managed carefully. The report did not say who had built the infrastructure. It did not explain how a system designed by a Velhari firm had ended up running entirely on code written by people who were no longer there. It said nothing about why the knowledge had never been properly transferred in the first place. These were not oversights. They were choices. Even now, with the station running at reduced capacity and the air slightly wrong, and the lights occasionally flickering, the council's first instinct was to manage the appearance of the problem rather than look directly at its cause. The medical database failed more slowly, but more dangerously. The council's shared medical archive had been running clean for more than a decade. What almost nobody knew was that the original architecture had been patched, updated, and effectively rebuilt so many times by human programmers that the original design was barely visible underneath. When the last human programmer submitted her departure papers and left, the patches stopped. Within 2 weeks, search functions began returning incorrect results. Cross-species records started filing into wrong categories. Diagnostic flags stopped triggering correctly. A Senokai patient in the station's medical bay was nearly administered a Valhari treatment protocol, a protocol that would have caused serious harm, before a nurse caught the error by checking the record manually against a printed reference guide. The nurse filed an incident report. The incident report went to the Council's Health Committee. The committee requested an emergency technical review. The review concluded that the database required immediate expert attention from personnel with deep system familiarity. There were no personnel left with deep system familiarity. They were all on Earth. The Orathi trade network was next, and the failure there was the kind that cost real money, which meant it was the kind that Orath actually paid attention to. His transit routes ran through 11 systems, and moved goods across some of the busiest corridors in the known network. For 6 years, the navigational computation behind those routes, the precise calculations that determined safe entry and exit points for faster-than-light travel, had been handled by a human navigation service operating quietly out of a small office on a station near the edge of the inner systems. Orath had known about this arrangement. He had simply never thought of it as a dependency. It was cheap, it was reliable, and the humans never asked for anything extra or caused any trouble. He had thought of it the way you think of the floor, as something that is simply there. The service stopped functioning the day the withdrawal declaration was filed. The first navigation error happened 11 days later. A train ship misjudged its exit point near the Drevith corridor and came out of faster-than-light travel too close to a debris field. The hull was damaged. The ship limped to port. Orath's office treated it as an isolated incident. Over the next 2 weeks, 6 more ships reported serious navigational problems. 2 were delayed by many hours. 1 took damage to its navigation core that required a full replacement. Shipping partners began rerouting away from Orathi corridors. Cargo insurance rates on those routes tripled in a single pricing cycle. Orath went to the council chamber and demanded action. He said the human withdrawal was damaging galactic economic stability. He said something had to be done. He said it loudly and with great confidence, the way he said most things. His chief of staff waited until he was finished, and then quietly passed him a folded note. The note said, "Legal has confirmed. No mechanism exists under membership law to compel a sovereign species to return." Orath unfolded and refolded the note twice. He did not speak again that session. Thark, who had been watching all of this from his seat in silence, decided that the correct answer was military. He ordered 3 Tharki battle groups to move toward the edge of human-controlled space. Not to attack, his official statement said, but to reaffirm council authority and open conditions for productive dialogue. He expected the human fleet to react defensively. A defensive position would give the council something to negotiate against. A show of uncertainty that could be read as willingness to come back on the council's terms. Minho did not move a single ship. Instead, he opened a public broadcast channel, the kind that anyone in the galaxy with a receiver could access. And he delivered a calm, unhurried statement. He listed the full composition of the human rapid response fleet. Every vessel class, every weapon system, coverage range, response capacity, number of ships currently active. The number was twice what the council had on record. Every year, Minho had submitted a budget request to the council for fleet expansion. Every year, the request had been denied or reduced or simply ignored. So humanity had funded it themselves, quietly, through channels that were entirely legal and entirely unannounced. Because nobody had asked, and Minho had not felt the need to explain himself to people who were not paying attention. The ships had been built and crewed and deployed, and the council had never once asked for an updated report. Thark reviewed the numbers in his private office. He read them again. He sat very still for a long time. He recalled the battle groups. His official reason was that the situation required further strategic assessment. Nobody pushed him. But the blow that reached the furthest, the one that spread across the galaxy and could not be contained or managed or spun into something else, came from Nari. Working from her office on Earth, she had spent the 2 weeks following the withdrawal doing something careful and methodical. She had gathered every original human science submission from the past 17 years. Every paper, every research note, every timestamp, every version history, every internal review comment. She had organized it into a clean, searchable, publicly accessible archive where every entry showed the original human authorship and original submission date in clear text. And directly beside each entry, she had placed the corresponding Council archive version, the one with the different name, the reassigned credit, the wrong date. Side by side. Undeniable. She released it on every open information network in the galaxy at the same time. The same way the withdrawal declaration had been released. Everywhere at once. No warning. No press conference. Just the information and the silence after it. It spread within hours. Research institutions across a dozen species began cross-referencing the records themselves. Because Nari had made comparison easy. And what they found confirmed everything. Independent verification came from 3 separate academic bodies within 2 days. Several Orathi scientists issued public statements, saying they had genuinely not known that work attributed to them was not theirs. A Velhari University suspended 3 faculty members. The head of the Council's Science Committee resigned before the end of the week, without issuing a statement. Vel went on record calling the archive misleading and politically motivated. It was the worst thing he could have said. By the following morning, 5 more research organizations had verified Nari's records and published their findings. The phrase politically motivated was repeated back in every critical response, and not kindly. Sene had watched all of it from the beginning. The temperature on the station, the trade route failures, Thark's ships turning back, the archive and its fallout. She had been running the same set of numbers in her private files for weeks, and the conclusion had not changed no matter how many times she recalculated. Humanity had not been a member of the Council. They had been the foundation of it, and the Council had never known, because they had never respected the humans enough to look. She opened a private channel request to Junho's office. He accepted within the hour. They spoke for a long time. Sene was honest. Junho was quiet. When she was done, he thanked her in a way that sounded like he meant it, because he did. Then he closed the channel and sat for a moment in the particular stillness of a man who is not surprised, but is still taking the time to feel the full weight of being right. Outside his window, Earth continued turning, ordinary and unhurried and completely indifferent to the slow unraveling of a galactic institution that had spent 22 years not paying attention. It was, Junho thought, about to start paying very close attention now. Vel called on a Tuesday morning, and Junho let the channel request sit on his screen for 4 minutes before accepting it. He was not doing it to be rude. He was doing it because he had learned over 22 years of dealing with the Galactic Council that the first few seconds of any conversation set the tone for everything that followed. He wanted Vel to spend those 4 minutes aware that humanity was not rushing to answer, that they were not sitting by the screen waiting, that there was, possibly for the first time, somewhere else they would rather be. When Junho accepted the call, Vel's face appeared on the screen. He looked different from the way he looked in the council chamber, where he always sat like a man who owned the room. He still sat straight. He still wore the formal Velhari garments with their deep gold trim, but his posture had something in it that Junho recognized from long experience. The posture of a person who needs something and is trying very hard not to look like they need it. Ambassador, Vel said. Council Chair, Junho said. He kept his voice even and his face pleasant. Vel did not waste a great deal of time. He spoke about the Council's long and valued relationship with humanity. He said recent events had caused disruption that nobody had wanted. He said there was strong desire among the member species to find a productive path forward. He said that if humanity returned to the Council, the research attribution issue would be formally reviewed and addressed. He said 2 new seats would be created for human delegates in the lower council chamber. He called this a meaningful gesture of goodwill. He called it generous. He said the word with the mild confidence of someone expecting gratitude in return. Then he said, "We will consider it." Vel blinked. There was a small pause. "That is good to hear," he said carefully. "I'll be in touch," Junho said, and closed the channel. He sat back in his chair and looked at the window. Outside it was a clear day. The water was gray and flat and quiet. The offer had been almost insulting, though Junho did not feel insulted. He felt clear. 2 seats in the lower chamber was the kind of offer you made to someone you still thought of as a junior party. A visible gesture that cost nothing structural and changed nothing real. A review of research attribution was not the same as a correction, and a correction broadcast publicly across the galactic network was not the same as accountability. And disruption that nobody wanted was how Vel described 17 years of systematic theft and 29 people listed in footnote 7, which told Junho precisely how much the council chair had actually understood about why they had left. He was not going to accept the offer. He had known that before the call ended. But Vel did not need to know it yet, because what Junho needed right now was time, and Vel had just given it to him by leaving the call, believing things had gone well. Junho sent a short message to Aram. It said 3 words: "Start the clock." Aram had been waiting for exactly that. She and Nari had been working in parallel for almost 6 weeks, quietly and without announcements, on something separate from the withdrawal process itself. While the Council had been dealing with dropping temperatures and failing trade routes and a science scandal spreading across every news network in the galaxy, the human team had been having a completely different set of conversations. There were species in the galaxy who were not the Velhari or the Orathi or the Tharqui. Some were small, some were old. Some had been sitting at the edges of the council table for decades, submitting proposals that were tabled and attending sessions where their delegates were talked over, and returning home to populations that asked why membership in the great galactic body never seemed to change anything for them. Some were not council members at all, and had always existed in the spaces between the larger powers, managing as best they could without access to the shared resources and collective agreements that council membership supposedly provided. Nari had prepared information packages for each. Clear, honest summaries of what humanity could offer in terms of scientific collaboration, navigation support, medical research sharing, and mutual defense coordination. Not dramatic proposals. Not promises designed to impress. Just direct conversations between groups who had something real to offer each other. Conducted without a large administrative body in the middle, taking credit for everything and adding nothing. By the end of the first week, 7 had agreed to formal partnership talks. By the end of the second week, 4 of those had moved to signed bilateral agreements, trade, scientific exchange, and mutual defense coordination, all documented and completed. The Senekai were the first to sign. Sene had moved faster than anyone expected, because she had been waiting for an invitation she had suspected was coming. 2 other smaller species followed within days. A 4th signed at the end of the week. These agreements were not a rival structure to the Council. Humanity was not trying to build a competing power. They were doing something simpler and in many ways more durable, connecting directly, without mediation, without a central body that absorbed the benefit and diluted the relationship. Smaller, cleaner, real. Orath found out on a Thursday through a trade intelligence report his office filed routinely. He read it once, then he read it again. He called 3 senior staff into his office and asked them, with the careful control of a man who did not want to sound alarmed, how humanity had managed to build a functioning multi-species trade and defense framework in under 2 months without anyone noticing. Orath did not find any of them satisfying. He identified the Fenoth, a quiet agricultural species who had just signed a mutual trade agreement with humanity, as the weakest link in the new network. He sent them a message suggesting, in the careful language of someone who wanted to threaten without appearing to threaten, that their standing relationship with the Council might be complicated by their independent agreements with a non-member species. He expected hesitation. He expected a polite response, asking for clarification. He expected the kind of nervous diplomacy that smaller species usually offered when a larger one applied pressure. Instead, the Fenoth forwarded the message directly to Minho's fleet command. Minho read it, made one call, and assigned a single escort vessel to run alongside Fenoth trade transports through open space. Not a battle group, not a display of overwhelming force. Just one ship, steady and quiet, present whenever the Fenoth needed it to be. Orath's second message to the Fenoth went unanswered. His third also went unanswered. The pressure campaign ended without a formal conclusion, because there was no moment where the Fenoth refused him. They simply continued doing what they had been doing, and Minho's ship continued being where it was. And eventually, Orath stopped sending messages because each one that went unanswered made his position look weaker than the one before it. 5 weeks after the withdrawal, Vel broadcast a public statement. It was long, and it had been carefully written by people whose job was to make things sound better than they were. It used phrases like valued partners and mutual misunderstanding and path toward renewed collaboration. It said humanity's departure was a regrettable development that the Council hoped could be resolved through open dialogue. It said humanity was welcome to come home. Junho was in his kitchen when the broadcast played. He watched it standing at the counter, holding a cup of coffee with both hands. He listened all the way through. He paid particular attention to the part where Vel said, "Come home." And he thought about that word, home, and who got to define it, and what it meant to invite someone home to a place that had never really treated them like they belonged there. He turned off the screen and went to sit by the window. Doyen, watching the same broadcast from his apartment, started laughing before Vel had finished the second paragraph. Not a cruel laugh. He was not a cruel person, but the deep, helpless kind that rises up when something is so far from the truth that the distance between what is being said and what actually happened becomes genuinely funny. He laughed until his neighbor knocked on the wall. He apologized through the wall. Then he sat quietly for a while, and the laughter faded into something quieter and more settled, like a room after a window has been opened. Aram sent her final network report to Junho that evening. 4 agreements, fully signed and active. 2 more in final negotiation. 1 joint defense coordination protocol with the Senokai, ready for approval. The framework existed. It was functioning. It did not need the Council's recognition to be real. Junho read the report. Then he drafted a short reply to Vel's office. He said that humanity appreciated the Council's public statement. He said that engagement talks might be possible. He said that if the Council was prepared to have a serious conversation, they should be ready to meet on Earth at a time and location that humanity would select. On Earth, on humanity's ground, in a room that humanity chose. On humanity's schedule. He sent the message, closed his terminal, and went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in months. He slept without difficulty, the way a person sleeps when something they have been carrying for a long time has finally been set down in exactly the right place. The formal petition arrived 6 months after the withdrawal, signed by every member species of the Galactic Council. Even Thark's signature was on it, even Orath's, written in the heavy formal script his species used for documents they considered beneath them, but necessary. Vel's signature was first, as protocol required, and it was clean and careful in a way that suggested it had been practiced. The petition requested that humanity agree to formal re-engagement talks. It said the Council recognized that issues existed which needed to be addressed. It said the Council was committed to a productive outcome. It did not say sorry, not yet, but it said please, in the careful, structured language of institutions that find please very difficult to say. And that was enough to move to the next step. Junho agreed to talks. He chose the location himself, a coastal conference center in a city by the sea, the city where he had been born, where he had gone to school, where he had first learned to read a map and understand that the world was larger than the street outside his window, and that the larger world had rules that were worth understanding if you wanted to navigate it well. Not a capital, not a government hall built for grandeur, a clean, working building with good light and windows that opened and a view of the water. The council delegation landed on a Wednesday morning. Vel came in person, which meant things were worse than they had publicly admitted. Orath came because he had no other viable option. 4 of his major trade corridors were still running at reduced efficiency, and 2 of his largest longtime partners had quietly opened accounts with human navigation providers. Thark came and sat, and said almost nothing, which was the most honest behavior anyone in the delegation displayed. Seni came separately, representing the Senokai, with a status that was technically observer, but in practice carried more weight than anyone from the council side understood yet. They arrived expecting something impressive, an architecture of human power, tall walls, formal guards, the kind of room designed to communicate that the people who built it wanted you to feel small by comparison. What they found was a building that felt like somewhere people actually came to work. Comfortable, well lit, smelling of wood and salt air, chairs that fit human bodies, a table that was round. Junho met them at the door. He shook hands with each delegate in turn, including Vel, without any coldness, without any performance of grievance. He led them to the conference room, offered tea and water and whatever they needed, and sat down. Not in the middle, not at the side, at the head of the table. He introduced Arum and Nari by name only. No titles, no credentials listed. Anyone who had been paying attention over the past 6 months already knew who they were. The first day was for listening. Junho had told his team beforehand that he wanted the council to speak first and at length, and that they should let them. Not because the explanations would be satisfying, but because every word on the record was useful, and people who have been let to talk long enough eventually say more than they intended to. Vel spoke for most of the morning. He talked about the council's history and its founding principles. He talked about shared challenges and collective responsibility. He used the word partnership so many times that Arun stopped counting at 19. He did not say the word apology. He did not say the words, "We were wrong." He spoke about moving forward. He spoke about building stronger frameworks. He spoke about the future in a way that carefully avoided saying anything clear about the past. Orath spoke about trade and economic stability and the importance of re-establishing reliable operational networks across the known systems. He spoke about the relationship between humanity and the Council, as though it were a mechanical problem that had developed a fault. The kind of fault that could be corrected with the right adjustments and some goodwill on all sides. He did not mention the Fenoth. He did not mention the pressure campaign. He looked at the table while he spoke. Thark said 6 sentences. He said the council valued stability. He said he hoped both parties would find a practical arrangement. He said the security of all species was a shared concern. He said it in the tone of a man reciting from a prepared list. And then he put the list down and sat back and was quiet for the rest of the day. On the morning of the second day, Aram placed a document on the table. She set a copy in front of every person in the room, including Sen, including her own team, with the same calm and deliberate movement she brought to everything. No announcement, no preamble, just the document, placed quietly, like a thing that had always been coming and had simply now arrived. It was called the Terms of Re-Engagement. It was not long. It did not need to be. Aram had written it with the same philosophy as the Withdrawal Declaration. If you cannot say it simply, you do not understand it well enough yet. The first term was full authorship correction. Every relabeled human research entry in the Council's official archive was to be corrected to show original authorship, with a public galactic broadcast confirming the corrections to all member species and all associated networks. Not a quiet administrative update, a public one, on record, permanent. The second term was a binding accountability protocol, a formal, enforceable process for handling future disputes over credit, personnel losses, and resource obligations between member species, overseen by an independent body with actual authority to impose consequences. Not a review committee, not an advisory panel, something with teeth. The third term was structural representation, human co-chairmanship of the Council's Science Oversight Committee and Defense Coordination Committee. Full chairs, with voting authority, effective immediately upon re-engagement, not consultation seats. The fourth term was the one that changed the room. It was the resolution of acknowledgement. Not an apology written in political language, not words that gestured toward accountability while avoiding it. A plain document, to be signed by every council member species and broadcast publicly to every inhabited system in the known network, stating in clear sentences that humanity had been wronged, that research had been stolen over 17 years, that personnel losses had been deliberately minimized and dismissed, that humanity's operational contributions to the Council and to Veth Station had been concealed and uncredited, that the Council had failed in its obligations to a member species for more than 2 decades, and that this failure was acknowledged without qualification. Vels set the document down after reading the fourth term. He looked at the window. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the terms were excessive. He said the language of the resolution was too absolute and too broad. He said structural co-chairmanship was a significant change requiring internal process. He said all of this with the careful control of a man who was still, even now, searching for a way to give less than was being asked. Orath said the resolution would embarrass member species before their own populations. He said it would be seen as a political weapon rather than a genuine statement of accountability. Nari put down her pen and looked at him. She spoke quietly, the way she always spoke, when she was completely certain of what she was saying. The archive we released tells everyone what happened. It has been verified by 12 independent institutions. The resolution does not create the embarrassment. It only decides whether the Council answers what everyone already knows honestly or not. The room was quiet. She read through it slowly, with a pen in her hand, the way she read everything that mattered. She circled something on the first page. She circled something on the third page. She set the pen down and said, in clear and measured language, that the Senokai formally seconded every term in the document. A delegate from the AV, a small, careful species who had been members of the Council for 31 years without ever being given a committee seat, looked at Seni, looked at the document, made a quiet note, then raised their hand and added their second. 2 more followed, then a third. The count was slow, and it was real, and by the end of the second afternoon, the numbers were where they needed to be. The vote was held the following morning. It passed. Not comfortably, not without Vel's jaw tightening in a way that was visible even to people who did not know how to read Velhari faces. Not without Orath spending the announcements staring at his hands. But it passed, and recorded votes do not soften with time. The resolution of acknowledgement was printed and placed before each delegate for signature. One by one, they signed. When the document reached Vel, Junho reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a pen on the table in front of him. Plain metal, no markings on it, the kind that costs nothing and lasts for years, made in a small factory in a city on Earth. Vel looked at the pen, then looked at Junho. "Use that one," Junho said, simply, without emphasis. "The way you say something when the statement does not need decoration." Vel picked it up. He signed. After the session closed, during the quiet meal Arum had arranged in the adjoining room, one of the junior Senokai staff asked Junho about the pen. Why specifically that one? Junho looked at it where it sat on the table beside his cup. He picked it up and turned it once in his fingers. "Because I wanted him to know whose hands built the room he was sitting in," he said. Then he put it back in his pocket and went to get more tea. Humanity re-engaged with the council. But it was not the same engagement as before, and every person in that room understood it. Before, humanity had been a presence the council forgot was there. Now they were co-authors of the structure. Before, their work had been invisible, absorbed and renamed and celebrated under other flags. Now it was on the record, permanently, exactly as it had always deserved to be. Minho stood his fleet down to standard patrol rotation. He sent a single message to his officers. "Well done. Rest up." He pinned no new photographs above his desk. The one already there, 29 faces from the Hanam, was not something he was ready to take down. He was not sure he ever would be. Nari sat down with her counterpart from the Senokai Science Directorate the following week, and they began drafting the first joint research paper their two species had ever produced together. She put both names on the cover in the same size, in the same font, side by side, exactly equal. Doyun accepted the position of chief engineer of the redesigned Vet Station. The reconstruction project had been one of the first practical outcomes of the new accountability protocols. A full systems review that finally put the right names on the right work. When the new station plaque was installed in the central engineering bay, it listed the names of every engineer who had contributed to the station's core systems over the years of its operation. Doyun's name was near the top. He ran his fingers across the letters once, slowly, the way his mother had once run her fingers across his name on a school certificate. Then, he picked up his tools and went to work. Arum flew home on a clear evening. She sat by the window of the transport and watched the stars come into view one by one as the ship rose above the atmosphere. She had the resolution document saved on her pad. She opened it and read it through one final time, from the first line to the last, and when she reached the plain and simple words at the end, the acknowledgement, the admission, the record set right at last, she closed the file and did not open it again. She looked out at the stars instead, at the dark between them, which was not empty, but full of ships and stations and species and all the long, complicated work of being alive in a large universe. She thought about what it had taken to get here. She thought about Junho's 43 unanswered complaints, and Nari's 3 months of early mornings, and Doyun fixing a pressure fault on a weekend because it needed fixing. She thought about 29 names in a footnote. She thought about the pen. Humanity had not walked away out of anger. Anger would have been easier to dismiss, and the council would have known exactly how to handle it. They had walked away out of something steadier and quieter, and in the end, far more powerful, the clear and unhurried knowledge of their own worth. The understanding that the table they had been holding up for 22 years was not worth sitting at, if the people across it could not be bothered to look down and see the hands underneath. They had built a better table. They had set it on their own ground. And they had waited, patiently, for the rest of the galaxy to come and sit at it. And the rest of the galaxy had come.